Okay. On October 31st, 2024, I filed a police report with the city of Cleveland stating that I had been raped by Marcus Perez, who was the head of the Office of Professional Standards of the Cleveland Division of Police. What I want to say in what's to come here is that I come to you as a woman in progress. It's been 2 years, a little over 2 years now. I'm managing. I have been involved here in Cleveland politically and, I mean, I guess you would call it that. With the police reform effort here in Cleveland. That has been my primary focus. Made a radio show. I co-authored the Cleveland Division of Police's new discipline policy, which was passed again through the Community Police Commission recently. I've done all that work for free, and just out of passion. You haven't seen me around very much, and the reason for that is that I will not lie. I won't sell you a bill of goods, and I don't want to come to you with purely my own pain and cynicism. You know, because that's what's breaking us all. And I don't, that's not a team that I want to be on, is a team of cynicism or promoting it. And so I've really struggled. I haven't known what to say to you. And when I say you, I'm talking about the people who live in this city. I'm not talking to the people who did this to me. When I say people, I'll get into that. I'm talking to the people who live here. I'm going to tell you about some stuff that's happened, and the trigger warning that I want to offer here is not about sexual assault specifically. The trigger warning that I want to offer is about cynicism. I do not want to contribute to your disenfranchisement. I do not want to contribute to your disempowerment. There is no more effective way to disenfranchise a group of people than to get them to do it to themselves. To convince them that they don't have any power, that their voice doesn't mean anything. Then they do their job. They do your job for you, you know. You don't really need to do too much at that point. And so I really caution you as a listener, because I need to tell you this. And what I don't have yet for you on the other side is the solution. I don't have the fix quite yet. I don't know what it is. I have not figured it out yet. But I'm deciding to come to you now because I don't want to figure it out entirely on my own. This is a group project. I'm dealing with what happened to me and the subsequent burial of the prosecution of that crime. That's not what I'm asking from anybody. Figuring out what's next for this city is a group project. And I want to do it with you. I don't want to come to you with a ready-made product, in part because that doesn't make sense. I can't come up with that on my own and then represent it and have it really make sense. You have to be a part of your own destiny and the designing of it. It's not my destiny alone. I want to be very clear that it is my destiny. But it's just as much mine as it is anyone else's, and it's no less mine than it is anyone else's. So I'm coming to you half-baked here because life is messy. And you know, I know we live online, and so it's like, well, everything has already kind of worked itself out. And, you know, I'm just kind of, you know, consuming other people's sort of finished products. But in democracy, in the real world, in life, you know, things aren't picture perfect. I've spent the morning very emotional. I didn't put on makeup, and this is the t-shirt that I wore to bed last night. I have bought this sort of stuff to make sure that things are as easy for me as possible to record when I see fit. But I'm not exactly done up. Anyway, this is a messy process, and it doesn't happen in isolation. We don't occur in isolation from each other. So I'm going to tell you about some of what's happened and some of my thoughts about it. And I want you to excuse the fact that I don't have a solution yet. I don't know what to do. I'm a very creative person. I'm a very smart person. a very educated person. And I don't have an answer yet. But I think that's because I've been trying to come up with it alone. And if I'm going to be practicing what I'm preaching, then I can't do this alone. So I guess what I'll start with is I'll say, if any of this sparks anything in you at all, please reach out to me. I would like to have fun together. I would like to dive deep together. I would like to showcase our value together and individually. And, you know, the goal here for me is, personally, I think the main thing that we have to have in common is a desire to outbuild cruelty. That's the true north. So if that resonates with you, please, you know, consider reaching out. You can find me on Instagram at Lil Struggles. That's Lil Struggles with a Z. Or you could email me, whatever. If you've got my number, you text me, call me. So with that said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened. And I'm not going to talk about what happened 2 years ago. I'm going to talk about what happened in the intervening time. So, the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor declined to bring the case to a grand jury. They didn't even bring it to a grand jury. The entity that investigated this ultimately was the Attorney General's office, their BCI unit. And, you know, they called me and told me that the county was declining the case after the investigation. And that the reason was, yeah, that they believed me. They believed I said no. But because we continued having sex during the rape, and they classified what occurred afterward as a relationship that occurred in the aftermath of this, which largely had to do with work and was never sexual. It was never sexual before. It was never sexual after this incident, but none of that should ever matter. But I say it just to say it. They claimed that they felt they would not be able to convince a grand jury that it qualified as rape or sexual battery under the Ohio Revised Code. So, again, they believed I said no, but they weren't going to prosecute.
I spoke with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor, Deb Brewer. She is the one that completely reviewed all of BCI's investigation, all of the documentation that came from Cleveland PD. And after she and I spoke, she also took everything that she knew and had to the head prosecutor, Michael O'Malley, before making a decision. And what they sent me is a declination letter, which means they feel they're not going to be able to sustain the burden of proof for rape or for sexual battery.
Wow.
To be able to present your case to even a grand jury. And I went through both ORCs with her while we were on the phone and said, fully explain to me why you feel this is not even presentable to a grand jury. And the biggest thing, the hurdle that they say they don't feel they could prove is in both of them, it says, that the offender substantially impairs the other person's judgment or control by administering drugs, intoxicant, or controlled substance, or there is surreptitiously a force, threat of force, or deception. And they're saying that is the part they don't feel they would be able to have a jury understand based on the fact that, yes, you said no, but continued having sex and then continued a relationship with him after. They feel that is their biggest concern, is that a jury would see that and not feel that any of those, the threat, force, or anything administering any control of your judgment would fall, and they wouldn't be able to prove it.
Was that the one and only time the two of you had sex?
That is the one and only time. I'm more curious than anything. He mentioned, I think you discovered the sexting. Would you characterize the sexting for that back and forth?
Yes.
Did she give you those?
I have nothing that is a text message that is so risque type thing. No.
Do you remember what was said in any of the? At the risk of embarrassing yourself, do you remember any of that?
I'm embarrassed with her adults.
Yeah, I know, but
I know when we
private, I guess, and it's always tough to.
Well, it wasn't like, and so it wasn't a ton of text messages, sexually.
Yeah, that's right. But when was it? Was it after this event, before the event?
It was right after the event, on the 3rd. Okay. There was a text message that she sent, and it was very explicit. I waited because I didn't know how to react.
I work in a different field than you. Your explicit conversation is, if you want to know, she writes, you need to do a better job of easing off my breasts, off my boobs, because I had fingerprint bruises all over them. And your response was, those are your fingerprints. That is...
Was that what you remember the sexting to be?
I mean, it wasn't like...
that's not what I...
I work in the Special Victims Unit, so I appreciate what you're saying, but that's funny.
I have a definition of peace. I've had this definition of peace since I created it at summer camp when I was a teenager with Israelis, Palestinians, Egyptians, Jordanians, and Americans. That definition goes like this: a situation in which problems can and do arise, as is always the case where there is diversity. But there is a trusted system for fixing them. Rape happens. It shouldn't happen. It does happen. Lots of things happen. Bad things. For me, I don't live in a mental space where I believe that we can root out all bad behavior. But my definition of peace is that we have a trusted system for fixing problems. That we believe in the system to fix the problems. What I was told was we believe that it happened and we're going to do nothing about it. Perez is no longer in his position. He left the position under strange circumstances that are mysterious. and after basically 2 years of being a hellraiser, left silently. And he no longer lives in Cleveland. His sister does. So it turns out, in the case file from BCI, from the Attorney General, is an interview with Marcus Perez about the incident. And he claims that the apartment where this took place is his sister's apartment. They lived there together. I didn't know either of those things. Because his family, his wife and daughters, were back in the DC area where he came here from. And that purportedly she was in the apartment when this happened. Purportedly in her own room with the door closed, which is a room that shares a wall with his bedroom, which is one of the rooms that we were in during the rape. His sister was not interviewed. His sister's name is Adana Perez. She is a sergeant detective in the domestic violence unit of the Cleveland Division of Police. And she would not cooperate with this investigation. I will note that that is not written anywhere in the case file from the Attorney General's office. The reason that I know this is because I asked the special agent from the Attorney General's office directly in a text message whether or not Miss Adana Perez was interviewed. And the answer was she didn't want any part in this. That Miss Perez didn't want any part in this. Like I said, it is not notated in the case file that Miss Perez refused to cooperate. Sergeant Perez. Was Adana Perez in the apartment when I was raped by the administrator of the Office of Professional Standards of the Cleveland Division of Police? I certainly didn't believe there was anybody in that apartment. It was an interesting experience to learn that that was on the table as a possibility. Anyway. I provided sort of a second layer of witnesses. These are not people who were present, but these are people who could testify to what I experienced in the aftermath. As I believed that my credibility would be called into question, so I offered these people, I offered all of our text messages, all their contact info and everything, and none of them were contacted. I asked why. I asked the special agent why that was, and she said that my credibility was never in question. No one ever questioned my credibility, is what she said. Nobody ever doubted my retelling of events of what occurred. it all comes down to this prosecutor who said they didn't think they could convince a grand jury. Now, here's the thing. The incident occurred 2 years ago, and I came forward 1 year ago. There were a lot of reasons for that. I met with him afterward, including with Commander of the Policy Unit, Commander Brian Carney, and Chandra Benito, the chair of the Accountability Committee on the Community Police Commission. We met at a coffee shop. Anyway, I had work to do. I had to keep doing my work. Just so we're clear, all unpaid work. But I had things to get done. And I was very concerned. The Office of Professional Standards is one of 2 investigative bodies inside of Cleveland that looks at police misconduct in the Cleveland Division of Police. The other one is called Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs investigates cases that occur internally in the department, internal affairs. And, those things can end up being criminally prosecuted if they're crimes, or not if they're not actual criminal acts. The Office of Professional Standards is the civilian entity that investigates complaints from civilians who say, I had this interaction with this officer. It's not, acceptable to me for X, Y, or Z reason. Please investigate. And so the Office of Professional Standards investigates those. And again, if there is a criminal element, it is referred to the prosecutor. But both are about police, misbehavior in some way. The civilian component, the Office of Professional Standards, is very challenging for the police or city officials to control. It is intended as an independent oversight entity. OPS's investigations, the entity that makes a call on what to do about them is called the Civilian Police Review Board, CPRB. And then the entity that has sort of final say over absolutely everything is the Community Police Commission. It's a lot of bit complicated. CPRB gives recommendations for discipline of officers to the chief of police or the public safety director, depending on the severity of the case. The thing is that under the charter amendment that created all of this, it's not really a recommendation. It's technically at that phase as a recommendation. The chief of police or the public safety director decides what to do, I guess. But if they decide not to go with the recommendation, CPRB can just say, well, we're overriding that. And we're going to stick with our thing, and that's then what the officer receives in discipline. And again, the sort of final say on all of this is the Community Police Commission. They can decide to take on any case they want, review it, and administer discipline. They can't... Anyway, so there are parameters around that, but that's basically it. I say all this not as a tangent. It's important. Cleveland has the most powerful civilian oversight body of the police to have ever existed anywhere in the United States. That's the Community Police Commission. But it's the whole of the Charter Amendment that created it, and it created the powers that CPRB has as well. And again, it is very challenging for any city officials or for the police to control these entities. I say it's challenging, but it is definitely not impossible. What we have seen is we have seen this city government do everything that they can to hamstring these bodies. I will not go into all of the specifics of that at this time. They are trying, they have been trying, and I believe at this point have succeeded in controlling these bodies. And so we all run around saying we have civilian oversight of the police in Cleveland. All the while, we don't, because our city government has co-opted all of the hard work that went into creating these. I wasn't living in Cleveland at the time. I can't take credit for that hard work. All the people who have suffered and died. Which sort of forms the engine of these oversight bodies. Our mayor, Justin Bibb, ran on supporting civilian oversight. And sadly, he has not supported civilian oversight. All right. So, Perez was recommended for his position at OPS. Some combination of his sister and I don't really know what else, but he wanted to be the inspector general, but was basically told, no, apply for this other thing instead, and then we'll put you in this inspector general position at a later time. That's a whole different position. I'm not going to get into that. The people who told him not to apply, or that he wasn't going to be given the inspector general position, I don't know exactly who those people are. My understanding is that they work for the city in some capacity. So, and basically, all right, take this lower level position as the head of OPS, and later on we'll give you the inspector general role. And so he did that. He moved to Cleveland and he did that. The city of Cleveland touted his resume in a pretty significant way. They really supported his moving into this position. Technically, it was the Civilian Police Review Board that installed him into the role, but very much with the backing of the city government. So now we're in a situation that's interesting and challenging. Not now, but when I filed the report. Because at that point, Perez had been investigating the mayor, and the mayor's driver, if you all recall, was in a car accident that was a pretty serious car accident. Perez was investigating this case like a dog with a bone. And he seemed to think that there was wrongdoing that was quite serious and scandalous, is my impression. And so when I filed the rape report, you can imagine this is kind of a difficult and interesting opportunity for some people. I thought, and like I said, this all started why it took me such a long time to come forward. Not that long, but long enough. I thought that the worst thing that was going to happen was that he was going to be held up as a poster child for why civilian oversight in Cleveland was a bad idea. That my rape was going to be used as a political football to tear down police reform. Which is something I care so deeply for. And for a while, I had decided I was going to take that L and just accept that this occurred and move forward with my life. That is until I was called to serve on a Cuyahoga County grand jury last summer. The first morning, we heard from the victim advocate unit inside of the prosecutor's office, who just sort of offered their take on sex crimes and how, we've looked oftentimes at these crimes in one way and we've learned a lot about how they operate. And I was nearly moved to tears. I was very gratitude that I expressed, to the prosecutor's office for their nuanced understanding of these topics that in the past we have not done a good job of explaining to people and teaching people about consent and all these sorts of things. It was at that point that I was quite sure I was going to file a report, and I said so to one of my fellow grand jurors at lunch that day. Meanwhile, I went to the Justice Center each day for grand jury. You do this, go twice a week over the course of 4 months. And that's at the Justice Center, which is directly across the street from, I guess, Adana Perez's apartment. So every day that I was there, that was the neighborhood I was in. And I thought about it. I thought about it every day. And we heard, anywhere from 20 to 45 cases a day. Another time I will get into more detail about my experience with the grand jury itself. But I really struggled with it. It was one of actually the most challenging things I've ever done in my entire life, was serve on that grand jury. The prosecutor did not enjoy my presence. They did not like me very much. Gosh, what were their names? There was Sasha and Lorraine Coyne. Lorraine Coyne is the same person who declined to bring Anthony Sowell's case to a grand jury when the first woman came forward about having been raped by him. This was prior to him killing all of those people. So this is the woman who refused to bring that case before a grand jury. Who knows what could have been if she had brought that case, presented it well. Maybe all those people would have still been alive. It's a shame. That type of prosecutorial discretion. Anyway, that being said, she still a prosecutor. I will get into the specifics of grand jury another day. But my experience there, there's a phrase people say, you can indict a ham sandwich. The reason for that is because the prosecutor controls the room. They don't legally control the room. Legally, the grand jury controls the grand jury room. And if you're going to kind of be more specific about it, the foreman kind of controls the room, because the grand jury foreman is the head grand juror, in effect. And the prosecutor has no authority. No authority. Zero authority. But they wear suits and they tell you that they have authority. And these are just everyday people who just live in Cleveland and ended up on this grand jury. They don't know any better. And I didn't know any better either. But I could tell something that first day. They pushed cases through with nearly, if not zero, evidence if they wanted to. That's all it took. It just required them wanting to. And they would present it however they would present it. They're very selective with what evidence they offer. And of course, you don't know what you don't know, so you don't know what to ask if they're not offering it. And anyway, the point of this is the combination of the presentation that the victim advocate gave that very first day when we were being trained, and the subsequent day in, day out of seeing how very, very, very low the bar is for what is referred to as probable cause for an indictment, or probable cause for guilt is what it is. And that's the threshold for whether a person gets indicted, and whether the case continues on to the next phase of, what will eventually be a trial or a plea deal. The bar was in hell. The bar was in hell, and for me, that was a significant problem for a variety of reasons. But they really stem from the same issue, which is the grand jury exists as a check between the people, and it was originally the king. But now it is just sort of the government here in the United States. It's a concept that originated in England. Anyway, and so this approach to me harmed victims and what they refer to as defendants, but were really suspects. And, because if you don't really do your due diligence to figure out whether this crime really occurred and if you have the right person, you are not just harming the suspect. You are harming the victim. What if you have the wrong person? What if the person who actually did whatever that crime is still out and about? Anyway, point is, bar was in hell. So, what I realized in all of that was that even though I didn't have much physical evidence of what had occurred, to me, in my case, I knew that the case would pass through a grand jury. And that's why I filed the report. That was the hinge reason that, at least I would say, it's not why I did it, but it's what enabled me to do it. It is directly the link between me not doing it and me doing it. I just felt, at a certain point, I felt that public safety in Cleveland does not have to include rapists. And while I really did not want to harm the police reform movement, when something that you care for gets so far away from what it really is, its real, true essence, when it adopts rapists, when it's co-opted by an independent body, is co-opted by its city government with friends and allies. Like, these are things that I'm not protecting. That's not what this was supposed to be about. That's not what this was supposed to be. And every day that we have these things in place and they're not what they're supposed to be, it stops us from realizing that there could be something real and better to fix our problems. It's a placeholder, and it's wrong. It's corrupt. It's criminal. And what about the next person this happens to? What obligation do I have to her or him? Or what about people this has happened to in the past from this individual? I don't know about anything. I'm not saying but you don't start doing this in your 40s. And so I decided I was going to file this report. What happened next was, it's a long story, really. I did everything that I could to protect his identity, because it was such a conflict of interest for the Cleveland police to investigate that I did everything that I could to, pause this until it could get in the hands of somebody. Not pause it, but I was withholding his name, so that it could get into the hands of anybody who would be not conflicted out, somebody who would be unbiased. And things were promised that did not occur with respect to that. My name was leaked, not leaked exactly, but was not properly redacted under Marcy's law as a victim in the report. There was a lot. There were reporters who were sneaking around, getting tips from probably family members, learning about this whole situation. And it was a painful process, to say the least. And anyway, so at some point, the case was finally moved to, I guess, an independent investigator, which was the Attorney General in that BCI unit. And when the prosecutor, when it was represented back to the county prosecutor to decide whether they were going to take it to grand jury or whether they were going to themselves declare a conflict of interest and let the Attorney General's office prosecute the case themselves, they basically said, we're declining this and we're returning it back to the AG's office for further investigation. Basically, if you find anything else, let us know. And there is a document in the file that basically says we've exhausted all options for investigating and we're done. We're closing the case. Case closed is what it says. But they didn't interview somebody who was potentially in the apartment. And they didn't document the refusal of a law enforcement official to cooperate in a law enforcement investigation for a crime that occurred in her home. And to my knowledge, they did not contact internal affairs of the Cleveland police to inform them of that fact, which is a violation of the rules of being a police officer in Cleveland. at the least. And at most, it's obstruction of justice to subvert the prosecution of her brother. Nobody investigated any of that, to my knowledge. Did anyone check to see if Adana Perez was at work that night? I don't think so. Because again, apparently, credibility was not the issue here. They believed it happened. They believed I said no, that I did not provide my consent. So anyway, after it got moved to the Attorney General's office, the Office of Professional Standards was shut down. I don't know what happened. They said that there was a breach of confidential records, but there wasn't. That's what they shut it down for a breach of records, but there were no records breached. And then that was in February. That was odd. Anyway, I mean, you know, I'm not sure what happened with the investigation into the mayor or his driver. I don't know, maybe it's possible, you know, that with this gift, I mean, with this rape case, maybe they could have tried to leverage Perez to have favorable outcomes for their investigations. I don't know, maybe he said no. Maybe that's when the case got moved to the Attorney General's office. Maybe maybe they kept the pressure on him. You know, maybe they knew what the process was going to be and that it was going to be represented after the investigation to the county prosecutor. Maybe they kept messing with him, you know. Maybe at some point, you know, they shut down OPS, just kind of keep messing around there. Maybe he had a backbone. Maybe he refused to be co-opted. I don't know. But then at some point, he started hinting at that he was going to leave. He did this in front of city council. I mean, I was thrilled. But I was also worried. At that point, the county prosecutor had received the case presented from the attorney general to them, and I was just in a holding pattern as to hear what was going to happen. Because, you know, I could be called to testify in front of the grand jury. I wanted to be called to testify in front of the grand jury. You know, when the case was presented. Or so I thought it would be. And, and maybe, you know, maybe what happened next was maybe they said something like, hey, if you don't leave, you're never leaving. Or not for a couple decades. Maybe they told him that they would bury him with this case if he didn't get out. I don't know. Then he resigned in executive session in front of CPRB with witnesses. Executive session is private. There's no formal record of it to discuss. It's for the purpose of confidentiality around HR matters. And then he was gone. Sort of. When he was asked about why he left or why he was leaving, he hinted at an idea that maybe this was untoward, that he had not in fact resigned, but was escorted out by security or police from his own office, and claiming that he hadn't resigned. Odd, because there are quite a few witnesses to him resigning in that executive session, but it wasn't recorded. So, And then August came. And the prosecutor declined the case. Maybe he left like that to keep open the possibility of a wrongful termination lawsuit if they didn't hold up their end of perhaps a bargain. But then they did, hypothetically. The case was not even going to be heard by a grand jury. The same entity that I had served on a year prior and saw how low the bar was, which was the reason that I came forward about my own case, because, of course, I was very familiar with the evidence in my own case. And that same exact thing, the exact reason that I had come forward, was the exact reason that was given. The inverse of it was the reason that was given to me for why the case was not going to be prosecuted. And he was gone. To my knowledge, Adana Perez is not facing any charges. She's not facing any charges in the criminal system or in the administrative system in the Division of Police here in Cleveland for her non-cooperation, her dereliction of duty. Her impugning the character of the division, the trust of the public. I don't know, is that untruthfulness? The absence of truth? Anyway. And there is no more investigation into the mayor or his driver. And as far as I understand, the Office of Professional Standards, similar to all of the other civilian oversight entities of the police, is in shambles. Shambles. Dysfunctioning. But if anybody were to want to start a movement for police reform, all anybody would have to do on the opposition is to say, we already have it. We already have it. What do you mean you want police reform? What do you mean you want civilian oversight? You already have it. Given to you by all of the people that we put in those positions. All that dysfunction that you see in civilian oversight in Cleveland, what is that? Is that because civilians don't know how to function? Is that what we're going with? Is that the community of Cleveland doesn't know how to act? They're just misbehaving people. Or is it because the people who are put there don't function on purpose? And we're hand selected by the people who run our city. Perhaps it is their people who don't function, who don't know how to behave. Or some of them know exactly how to behave to make nothing function. So, where does this leave us? Gave you a lot of hypotheticals, posed a lot of questions. And I told you that I'm coming to you half-baked here because I don't have all the answers. I don't have all of the answers to what happened and why. I have a lot of different events that have occurred. I have some number of public records that I have received. I am left unclear. Unclear. I don't do work with the Community Police Commission anymore. I believe that it has been entirely co-opted by our city's government. I don't know what's next. I don't know what's next. They tell us to go local. That's what they say, you know. Everything that's happening on the national stage, go local. I did that. Every step of the way with the police reform that I tried to enact was partially successful, largely not, was impeded by the city of Cleveland's government. Every step of the way. You know, and we're all Democrats in this city, supposedly. And one of the big things that Democrats talked about in this last election and the one prior was that this is it's a fight for democracy. That's what was in question. That's what was on the line. Was democracy versus authoritarianism, and we're all Democrats here, and yet every direction I turn, our Democrat leaders here locally, they don't seem to like democracy very much. They don't seem to really like civic engagement very much. They don't seem to like participatory governing very much. It kind of begs the question, do they like us very much? You know? Do they like us? Do they like the community? Do they like the people who live here? Or do they see us as their enemy? Do they see us as little nuisances to kind of manage? The law department here, one of the metrics that they use for success is how many resident complaints they can quash. That's one of their metrics. I happen to know that because I was sitting in a budget committee meeting, a budget hearing one day at City Hall. And I was floored. I was honestly, I was shocked. I don't know the exact wording that they use, but yeah, how many cases, how many instances they can bury the complainant. Striking. So the people who were installed by the mayor identify their success based on how many people who complain about misconduct in this city they can bury. They refer to those people as liabilities, right? So not the people who commit harm, not the criminals, but the people who complain about being victims. Because those are the people who can sue the city, take our money, take our tax dollars. And so it makes sense from a very kind of clinical perspective. But what doesn't make sense is how people could be so much more committed to the short game than they are the long game. So instead of looking at the people who commit crimes as the liabilities, they look at the people who complain about them as the liabilities. The people who commit the crimes are the assets that they then protect. These are not people who are going to be sticking around here very long. And they're not people who, in my view, have a very strong moral compass. Because honestly, you don't have to be born in Cleveland and die in Cleveland in order to be committed to the right thing. But I don't think these people are committed to either of those things. To being here for the long haul or for the well-being of us, even if they are here temporarily. You notice patterns, as you're involved in this, and it shows you where people's compass is pointed. Is it pointed toward the real thriving of this community and the protection of its people? Or is it pointed toward quick fixes and easy outcomes and things that maintain a narrative and suppress anything in opposition to that? And let me tell you, folks, that is the definition of authoritarianism. In January, our mayor, who, I want to be clear, is not the root cause of all of our problems. He is not an entire system. This is one person. This is one small person. And so I'm not here to demonize him, because that's not helpful, aside from anything else. It's not constructive, and he did not cause all of this himself. This is a system that welcomes characters like his in and incentivizes the worst parts of a person like him. Which I'll say it differently. It incentivizes the worst parts of any person. And I think maybe he has decency. I did used to have a very close personal relationship with this individual, with the mayor, Justin Bibb. We used to have a romantic relationship. That's not really a secret. That's never been a secret on my end. It was pretty limited. That's pretty much all I could say about it. I mean, I could say more, but there's not really much else to say. We didn't know each other very well overall. Like, it wasn't that long of a period of time. And, you know, and I've always been transparent about this existence of this relationship, which was not the preference, as it turned out, that he had. But I didn't know it was a secret. I also didn't run around telling people. I mentioned it when I felt it was relevant, you know. I had no legal obligation because I'm not paid by anybody for anything that I've ever done with any of this stuff. So I have no legal obligation to share that information, but it's a very mistrusting environment for a reason, the police reform space. And so it was important to me to, you know, tell the people I was working with most closely because, you know, and it's called informed consent for a reason. And I don't think that it's a surprise that all of these people struggle with the concept of consent. I don't struggle with that concept. So the people I was working with, they had to have the information that was, I think, necessary for them to have in order to make an informed decision to consent to engaging with me, and telling me lots of privileged information and that sort of thing. And that was their decision to make. I mean, I think I was being generous, but I think that it was moral. I think it was a morally correct decision. And I say that because I thought about it extensively. I didn't think about it very long. It didn't take me very long to come to that decision, but it took a lot of very intense thinking and feeling for me to come to what I believe is the right decision. And there were entities who were very upset with me about doing that. But, alas. Anyway. And those people did consent in an informed way, you know, to working with me after that. As I think they should have, you know? So, anyway. I say all that to say, now I think it's relevant for you to know in the context of this story. I think that maybe one of the reasons that my case got buried was because of that. Because of that, I don't know. I don't know. They didn't, maybe Justin didn't want it to appear that he was being in some way favorable to me.
The last thing I wanted was for the mayor to be like, this guy is, you know, to have something over me, which and it's been that way. So I try very hard after that first encounter to just not put myself in that, like, Cleveland is a beast.
And let me tell you this. The lengths that he seems to be willing to go to not appear favorable to me violate my rights. I have fewer protections than what a person is supposed to have in the city because of that. If anybody thinks that this relationship that existed gave me a leg up, doesn't understand how power functions for people who are honest. So, no. Point to the leg up. Point to the positions I've been offered, the money I've made. Point to the benefit. Point to the rape case that was prosecuted. You won't be able to. To anybody who's considering a relationship with the mayor moving forward, please consider not living here. Because it will not go well for you. It will not go well for you. Now, like I said, he's sort of a cog in a machine of sorts. He's pretty high up in it with respect to Cleveland's machine, but anyway, this is a person who ran on this issue, who ran on police reform. And, you know, what he has done with it is cripple it in every way he possibly can. Why? I don't know. I don't think that there's necessarily a great deal of a moral compass operating there. There's a lot of self-serving compass. And so I don't know what to say about that. But and to Tony George, if you think that trying to abolish issue 24, which is the charter amendment that created the commission, is going to be a disservice in some way to Mr. Justin Bibb, I mean, it's not. He, I think, really would like that. I think he would really kind of get off on that. Now, that being said, I think that because it's complicated because he's kind of co-opted it to such a degree that he does have cover now, right? So he can go around and say, I have this police commission. Look what I've done. You know, this community police commission. Look what I've done for reform. You know, and have it be absolutely powerless and meaningless, but he gets to still tout that. But honestly, I think that if the whole thing would go away, he would be thrilled. But if it went away, he would then have to, again, he would have to deal with the ramifications of that, which would be the creation of potentially a new movement to hold police accountable. And he doesn't want to, I imagine he doesn't want to deal with that. So I don't know. I think that you guys should just be friends again, you know? You have a lot in common, as far as I can tell. So, I don't know. I guess I would ask you... I don't actually have anything else to say to you, Tony George. Thank you for listening. So, anyhow, Right. People say go local. I've tried. I'm trying. And, right, in January, Trump was inaugurated. And Mr. Bibb did one of the most striking interviews, you know, I've ever heard. Unbelievable. Unfreaking believable. When he was asked whether he considered himself to be part of the resistance to Donald Trump, our mayor, who is the president of the National Democratic Mayors Association across the whole country. He's the president of the group of Democrats that are mayors in our city, in our country. He said, you know, I think Clevelanders are tired of the resistance. This was after he referred to undocumented immigrants as illegals and a bunch of other unfortunate rhetoric. That's what he said. He said he thinks that Clevelanders are tired of the resistance, which was his way of saying, no, I do not consider myself to be part of the resistance. I represent my people, and my people are not resistors. Not anymore. They're tired. It made my blood boil, to be honest. At the time, I was fighting for lawful representation on the Community Police Commission, which I did not achieve. Fighting. My goodness, was I fighting for that. Why was I fighting so hard? Who was I fighting? You know, you go so many rounds and God, you get tired. You get tired. You do get tired. Isn't that an interesting concept? You get tired of resisting at a certain point. But that's because you have a formidable opponent to you. And in every situation that I come across in this city, the opponent to the people who live here is our current government. Our current government. Not our government, but our current government. The same people who then get on a podcast and say, Clevelanders are tired of the resistance. We are tired because you have beat us down. We have tried to resist. We've said no. But you see people who say no as liabilities. You see our determination as a threat. Because you just have a right to anything you want, right? You have the right to any and everything that you want. You could take whatever you want. You don't need our consent. Do you need our consent, really? I don't know. Doesn't seem like you think that you need our consent. But democracy is consent. Mr. Democrat Mayor. Democracy is consent. I told you the reasons that the prosecutor gave for not prosecuting my case. One of which was that we continued having sex while the rape was occurring. Even though they believed I said no. It's almost like once I was beat into submission, I stopped resisting for my own survival. I changed the whole narrative around in my head. When you're in a situation that you can't change, there's a response to that kind of trauma. A lot of us are familiar with fight, flight. There's also freeze and fawn. That fawn response. They believed I said no, but we continued having sex while I was being raped. And I continued to communicate with him afterward. I did. That's true, I did. Continue to communicate with him afterward, and to be honest with you, I was a absolute wreck in the aftermath. But I wasn't fully processing what had occurred. I told a friend of mine what had happened. A contemporaneous witness is what that's called. One of the people that the Attorney General did not interview. I said that I had technically said no, but I didn't want to talk about it like that. I didn't want to think about it like that. I didn't want to think about it like that. It was technically non-consensual, but I don't want to think about it like that. And so I didn't. I was, however, prescribed at the time a medication for PTSD for sleep. I don't take that anymore, but... And this is all before I kind of fully processed that non-consensual means rape. Anyway, I don't love how I reacted in the aftermath. I didn't want to think of what happened to me as what happened to me. That started immediately after I failed to stop what was happening from happening. And what I'd like to do is I would like to turn to some of the people who have bent the knee to people in power. People who have realized, you know what, I'm going to jump on this boat because they've bombed mine and it's sinking and I'm not going to make it. And my survival is important to me. So let me see if I can get on their boat. All of the grown men who are currently doing that with people in their lives. I'm not just talking about our government. Just think about that moment when things shift, when you realize, I need to get on this boat because this ship is sinking. I have to save myself. You know? God, I really don't like them. And one of the reasons is because they're the people who sunk my ship, but I have to save myself. That's called a fawn reaction. And you can convince yourself that you consented, but you consented under duress. That is called coercion. They didn't win you over fair and square. To say nothing of the fact that that's not how sexual relationships should ever operate. Winning someone over. Anyway. Tired of the resistance. So, if we stop resisting, but more so if we stop trying to figure out how to build, they will tell us that we are just tired of resisting and they're just doing what we want. They will tell us that they will not prosecute our violators because somehow evidence after the fact of the violation is in any way relevant to the fact that it occurred. Somehow speaks to, did you really, fight back enough? Did you really resist enough? There was something that Corey Lewandowski said. He said it same week that my case was declined by the prosecutor. This was about sending in the National Guard to Democratic cities who, they basically said were just open prisons, kind of, is how they sort of described it. Like, we're just violence-ridden to the core. And that was their rationale. That's been their rationale for sending in the federal government troops, the army, to come in. However you want to word that. For us, to protect us, to protect against us, right? Really depends at that point who is considered the us and who is considered the them when the time comes, right? I want you to keep in mind what Justin said about resisting, being tired of it, referring to illegals. Corey Lewandowski, senior advisor to Kristi Noem, said, "We want every sanctuary city to understand we can touch people any place, anytime. That's what he said. What do you think Justin was doing when he said, I don't stand with my own people anymore? You think he was kind of bending the knee to Trump? You think maybe he was kind of bending both of them? Maybe he's fawning. Here's the problem. When a rape victim fawns in the course of a rape, the person she is saving, or he is saving, depending on who it is, are themselves, is the one person. And the person that they're sacrificing is themselves. But in the case of governance, if Justin is fawning to the Trump administration, he's saving himself by sacrificing the rest of us. We are the body that keeps that score. He's sort of metaphorically the mind that gets to dissociate and run off into safety. Because when they come for us, when our federal government comes for us, I don't think that our city leaders will be by our side. I think that they will have already sold us out for their own protection. And so, and they will tell us that we asked for it. They will tell us that we consented. That's what a vote is, in a sense. Consent. It is to say yes. But think about the voter turnout in Cleveland. How many of us say yes? How many of us say no? How many of us say nothing? For me, this all loops back onto the same stuff. Every time that the city obstructed the functioning of the Community Police Commission or the Office of Professional Standards, they could have done something else. They could have done something else. They could have supported participation. They could have empowered the people who live here. They chose to do the opposite. They chose disempowerment. They didn't need to. That is the only place where my hope lives. I have had an experience with police reform here that has shown me the moments in real time where people with power take power away from the disenfranchised and make them disenfranchised. Not just the result, not just the feeling that my vote doesn't count so I don't vote, or the feeling that my voice doesn't matter so I don't say anything anymore, or that I'm so beat down that I don't even try to resist anymore. These were the moments where things, where a soul was crushed. You could see the crushing. My soul was crushed. Not into oblivion. But my God, have they tried? I got to see the mechanisms inside the system of when one choice to empower could be made and the choice to disempower was instead made. I have seen people choose authoritarianism over democracy. So I know what it means to choose democracy. What it means is this: I love you. And I love me. And I love us. And we have to pour into that. That's how we outbuild cruelty. We have to build. We cannot allow ourselves to be filled with cynicism. We have to build ourselves strong. We have to constantly return to ourselves in a collective, citywide mindfulness practice. We have to make this a home that we feel safe returning to. I call it soul building. It's like bodybuilding, but for the soul. That's it, Cleveland. That's what we do. That's what we have to do. We have to figure out how to forgive ourselves and forgive each other. We have to figure out how to mean it, how to work toward that, how to mean it. Now, I'm not talking about just everybody needs to suddenly forgive everybody for everything they've done wrong and move on. The people who have wronged other people, we need to do the work of accountability. That, I'm not talking about this pie in the sky crap. I'm not talking about aimless hope, baseless hope. No, I'm talking about real hope. I'm talking about a real foundation built on real accountability, not punishment, accountability. Only a strong person can take account for their actions. A weak person can't. A weak person can't. A weak person is too feeble. But we're not weak, Cleveland. I like the mayor of Chicago. He's a cool guy. I think he should be president of the Democratic Mayors Association. That guy knows how to build. That guy knows self-compassion. You could see it. I don't know, I might have never talked to him, but you can feel it. You could feel it. You could feel his internal monologue. I feel like you could feel how he talks to his family and how they talk to him. His neighbors. How he was talked to as a child. You could almost see it. We are beautiful. Don't let anybody ever tell you that you should diminish that light. Don't let anyone tell you that that light is for sale or for free. It's yours. It's ours. Mine. So, like I said, I don't know. I don't know exactly what comes next, and this is all messy. Being a human being is messy. We don't come ready-made. We don't come AI picture perfect. We don't exist in silos. We need to start getting together in person. We need to figure out how to combat all this technology that keeps us away from each other. We have to pour into ourselves. We have to. We have to cook ourselves healthy food if we can afford it. We have to cook ourselves healthy thoughts. We can always afford those. I'm not interested in our enemies. I don't know who they are. The extent to which anyone that I've spoken about today feels any resonance with what I'm saying, you're one of us too. If you've harmed me or us, you're not beyond the pale. I don't believe in that. I can tell you why. So professionally, I'm a sentencing expert. And what that's meant is that I have I've worked on death row in Arkansas for the federal public defender there. I've worked on cases in Ohio, child lifer cases, which is people who were sentenced to prison, life in prison as children, which is no longer legal in the state of Ohio. And it's retroactive. So if you've, this is a new law, if you've served enough time and you didn't kill too many people, you may be eligible for parole. And you're also eligible for a public defender. And then that's who I've contracted with. And what that means is all of that in different components of the legal system. But I tell the life stories of people who have committed horrifying crimes against other people, and I try to explain why they are the way they are. I will never try to explain why someone did exactly what they did, and I will never try to excuse it. And I think that it is a disservice to all of us to approach it in such a way. It is simply, and not so simply, about understanding a person. Looking at the world from their shoes for a moment and just trying to see how a person could cause so much harm. It's never about diminishing that harm. It's about how we got here. And I don't believe that those people are lost souls. So best believe that I don't believe anybody who I've talked about today or this system or this government or this country is lost. I certainly don't believe this city is lost. We're not lost, we're trying to figure it out. Most people can barely afford to get through the day, let alone try to figure out how to fix it in a bigger way, on a broader scale. I am very lucky to be able to sort of be one of those people who can spend the time thinking about some of those things. I don't consider it to be a privilege. I consider it to be a gift. And I wish everyone had it. That's why it's not a privilege. I think it's closer to a right. But whatever it is, I'm grateful. I'm gonna wrap things up. The sign of strength to me is the capacity to take accountability. What a turn on. You know? That definition of peace. A situation, in which problems can and do arise, as is always the case where there is diversity, but there is a trusted system for fixing them. When I got the declination of my case from the prosecutor, the experience that I had was one in which the man who did this to me raped my body, and the people who represent us and made that decision raped my spirit. They didn't kill it. And it was never theirs. It's always been mine. They don't get to define what an asset is or a liability. They don't get to define my peace. They don't get to define what it means for me to be a patriot of the city that I live in, of the city I was raised in, my home. They don't get to define it for this country either. I am a patriot of this country. I'm a patriot of this city. Let's try to build that peace. Let's wake up. Let's realize no one is going to build it for us. And if they did, we would be children and they would be our parents. And we don't have parents. We have ourselves. We have self-determination. You know, we have democracy. Jill Lepore is an historian. She said something recently. Forms of tyranny succeed by destroying your determination. So, let's build some more. Reach out to me. Let me know how we can do that together. And I'll keep working on it. But I'd like to work on it with you. Not just here in my little egg chair by myself. It's a group project. We must encourage participation. And the way that you know if somebody's not in it with you is if they are discouraging that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my voice. It means a lot. And we'll talk soon. Take care of yourselves. I'll take care of me, too. I'd like for us to take care of each other, too.